Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We are interested to know in which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the spring of 1886, Douglas County, Missouri became the center of events so profoundly unsettling that investigators would still be attempting to unravel them 4 decades later. Douglas County sits in the south-central portion of Missouri, a landscape carved by ancient waters into a maze of limestone hollows, narrow ridges, and underground cave systems that honeycomb the earth beneath the surface. The region is defined by Bryant Creek and its countless tributaries, which cut through dense forests of oak, hickory, and shortleaf pine. In 1886, the county was still recovering from the chaos of the Civil War and Reconstruction, its population scattered across isolated homesteads connected by primitive roads that became impassable during the spring rains and winter snows. The county seat had only recently been established at Ava in 1871, after years of conflict between different settlements vying for the designation. The nearest substantial town, West Plains, lay more than 20 miles to the east over rough terrain that could take a full day to traverse by wagon. Among the countless small settlements and family homesteads that dotted Douglas County, one of the most isolated was the collection of perhaps 15 families that lived along a tributary called Devil's Fork, named for the twisted, two-pronged shape it formed as it joined Bryant Creek approximately 17 miles southeast of Ava. The families in this hollow were predominantly of German and Scots-Irish descent, subsistence farmers who raised corn, kept hogs and cattle, and supplemented their diet with game from the surrounding forests. Communication with the outside world was limited to monthly trips to Ava for supplies, and the occasional visit from a circuit-riding Methodist preacher who served the scattered communities of the southern county. Medical care was virtually non-existent. In the 1880s, trained physicians were scarce throughout the frontier, and the few who practiced in towns like Ava rarely ventured into the most remote hollows, except in cases of dire emergency. It was into this isolated world that Dr. Matthias Brenneman arrived in the late autumn of 1884. According to an article published in the West Plains Journal dated November 13, 1884, Brenneman was a German immigrant, approximately 40 years of age, who claimed to have studied medicine in Heidelberg before emigrating to America in the 1870s. He arrived in Devil's Fork, accompanied by his wife Greta, a thin, silent woman in her late 30s, and their 3 children, Klaus, age 14, Margaret, age 12, and Wilhelm, aged 8. The family purchased a 40-acre parcel from a homesteader named Ezekiel Combs, who was relocating to Springfield, and began construction of a substantial 2-story log house on a bench of land overlooking the fork itself. What made Brenneman unusual from the start was his evident education and the library he brought with him. According to the diary of Martha Hensley, a neighbor woman whose family lived approximately 2 miles downstream, Brenneman possessed more than 50 books, some in foreign tongues, a collection that would have been extraordinary anywhere in Douglas County, much less in a remote hollow like Devil's Fork. More troubling still was Brenneman's immediate declaration that he was a physician and healer, available to treat the ailments of anyone in the settlement who required his services. In an era when medical credentials were rarely verified and anyone could hang out a shingle declaring themselves a doctor, this was not particularly unusual, but several residents noted that Brenneman never spoke of where he had practiced before coming to Missouri, and he seemed unusually eager to establish himself as the medical authority for the Hollow. For the first year and a half of Brenneman's residence in Devil's Fork, his reputation was entirely positive. According to multiple accounts collected by investigators decades later, Brenneman proved himself a capable physician by the standards of frontier medicine. He successfully treated a variety of common ailments, including pneumonia, dysentery, and injuries from farm accidents. He appeared particularly skilled with broken bones and infected wounds, and he charged reasonable fees, often accepting payment in the form of labor, produce, or livestock. The diary of Martha Hensley contains numerous references to Brenneman's successful treatments. In an entry dated March 7, 1885, she wrote, "Dr. Brenneman came today to see to Jacob, who has been fevered for 3 days. The doctor gave him a powder and instructed me on poultices. He would take no payment, but asked if he might borrow our copy of the Scripture, as his own was in German, and his children needed to practice their English reading. I, of course, agreed. He is a great blessing to our settlement. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that Brenneman's transformation from respected healer to something far more sinister appears to have begun quite suddenly in late February of 1886. Multiple witnesses later reported that Brenneman's behavior changed dramatically following an incident that occurred on February 23, 1886. According to a sworn statement given to Douglas County Sheriff William Talmadge on May 15, 1886, a farmer named Isaiah Pritchett had asked Brenneman to examine his son, Thomas, age 16, who had been experiencing severe headaches and episodes of temporary blindness. Brenneman spent several hours examining the boy in the Brenneman house, and when Thomas emerged, he appeared changed in his countenance, pale as milk, and would speak to no one, according to Pritchett's statement. Over the following 3 weeks, Thomas Pritchett's condition deteriorated rapidly. Martha Hensley's diary entry for March 4, 1886 records, "There is great concern for the Pritchett boy. He sits in his father's house and will not eat. He speaks words no one can understand, and Isaiah says he has taken to writing strange symbols on the walls with charcoal. Dr. Brenneman visits him daily, but the boy grows worse. Some are beginning to whisper that the doctor's treatments are the cause rather than the cure." On March 11, 1886, Thomas Pritchett died. The West Plains Journal published a brief notice of his death on March 18th, attributing it to brain fever, a catch-all diagnosis commonly used for any condition involving mental derangement or unexplained neurological symptoms. However, according to multiple witness statements collected later, Thomas Pritchett's death was accompanied by circumstances that deeply unsettled everyone present. Isaiah Pritchett's statement to Sheriff Talmadge describes his son's final hours. Thomas was lying in his bed, speaking words that sounded like German, but was not German. Dr. Brenneman was present. My wife, Rebecca, was holding Thomas's hand. Then Thomas sat upright, though he had not moved for 2 days. His eyes were open, but seeing nothing of this world. He pointed at Dr. Brenneman and said in a voice that was not his own, The door beneath is open now, and you have brought us through." Then he fell back dead. Dr. Brenneman went pale as I have ever seen a man go, and left the house without a word. Perhaps most inexplicable was what happened immediately following Thomas Pritchett's death. According to multiple witnesses, Dr. Brenneman did not return to his own home, but was seen walking into the forest toward a limestone cave system known locally as Devil's Throat, located approximately 1 mile up a steep hollow from the Brenneman property. The cave was a vertical shaft approximately 30 feet deep that opened into a larger chamber with an underground stream. Local children sometimes dared each other to descend into it, though most adults avoided it due to the difficult access and its association with various folk superstitions. Ephraim Stokes, a neighbor who was checking his trap line on the morning of March 12th, later testified that he saw Brenneman near the cave entrance carrying a large satchel and what appeared to be several of his books. When Stokes called out a greeting, Brenneman did not acknowledge him, but continued toward the cave opening. Brenneman returned to his home later that same day, but according to his wife Greta's testimony, which was not given until years later, under circumstances that will be described subsequently, he was transformed by what he had done in the earth. From that point forward, Greta Brenneman told investigators in 1907 her husband claimed to have found the source within the cave system, though he never explicitly stated what this meant. She described how he became obsessed with treating patients, particularly those with any kind of chronic or serious ailment, but his methods changed entirely. He began requiring patients to come to his house for treatment rather than visiting them in their homes, and he insisted that certain treatments required the patient to spend the night in a specially prepared room on the second floor of the Brenneman house. Martha Hensley's diary provides chilling documentation of the changes in Brenneman's practice and the growing unease in the Devil's Fork settlement. Her entry for March 28, 1886 reads, "Dr. Brenneman came to our house today, offering to treat Jacob's rheumatism, which has troubled him these 10 years. He was most insistent that Jacob come to his house for a new treatment he has learned. Jacob refused. Dr. Brenneman became agitated and said that we did not understand what he could offer, what he had access to now. His eyes were strange. After he left, Jacob said he will not be going to Brenneman for any treatment, and he forbids me from sending the children there for any reason." More troubling still was the fact that several people in the settlement did accept Brenneman's offers of treatment for serious or chronic conditions, and every one of them suffered the same pattern of deterioration that had afflicted Thomas Pritchett. In early April 1886, Sarah Combs, a woman in her 50s who had been suffering from severe back pain, spent 3 nights at the Brenneman house for treatment. According to her husband Jeremiah's statement to authorities, she returned home claiming to feel much improved, but within a week she began exhibiting disturbing symptoms. She stopped sleeping, would sit by the window throughout the night, staring toward the Brenneman property, and began speaking about the voices from below that she could hear calling to her. On April 19, 1886, Sarah Combs walked out of her house before dawn and was found later that morning at the entrance to Devil's Throat Cave. She was alive but unresponsive, her hands and clothing covered in mud as though she had been attempting to dig into the cave floor. She was brought back to her home but never spoke coherently again, dying on April 27th in a state that witnesses described as similar to a waking coma. Between late March and early May of 1886, 7 adults from Devil's Fork underwent treatment by Dr. Brenneman, and all 7 experienced similar patterns of deterioration. According to Sheriff Talmadge's report dated May 20, 1886, the symptoms included progressive insomnia, extreme pallor, weight loss, withdrawal from family and community, speaking in unknown languages or nonsensical phrases, obsessive behavior centered on caves or underground spaces, and in 4 cases, death within 2 to 5 weeks of treatment. The 3 who survived did not recover their previous mental capacity and required constant supervision from family members for the remainder of their lives. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the meticulous documentation that Brenneman himself created during this period. When Sheriff Talmadge finally entered the Brenneman property on May 12, 1886, under circumstances that will be described, he discovered that Brenneman had been keeping detailed records of each patient's treatment and subsequent condition. These records were written in a mixture of English, German, and what appeared to be Latin, along with numerous symbols and diagrams that none of the investigators could interpret. According to Talmadge's report, the records made clear that Brenneman was fully aware that his treatments were causing the deterioration in his patients, and moreover, that this deterioration was not an accidental side effect, but rather the intended outcome of what he called the transference. The crisis in Devil's Fork reached its culmination on the night of May 10, 1886. According to multiple witness testimonies compiled by Sheriff Talmadge and later reported in the Springfield Republican dated May 22, 1886, residents of the Hollow were awakened around midnight by screaming coming from the Brenneman property. The screams were those of children. Several men, including Ephraim Stokes, Jacob Hensley, and Jeremiah Combs, armed themselves and made their way to the Brenneman house. What they found there would be seared into the memories of everyone present for the remainder of their lives. The front door of the Brenneman house was standing open. The interior was lit by numerous candles, and the walls of the main room were covered in writings and diagrams similar to those later found in Brenneman's patient records. Greta Brenneman was discovered in the kitchen in a state of severe distress, weeping and praying in German. When the men demanded to know where Dr. Brenneman and the children were, she pointed upward to the second floor. According to Ephraim Stokes's testimony, given under oath on May 13, 1886, what they discovered upstairs remains one of the most horrifying scenes witnessed in the history of Douglas County. In the largest second-floor room, which Brenneman had been using as his treatment space, they found the 3 Brenneman children. Klaus, Margaret, and Wilhelm were alive, but had been subjected to some form of procedure that Brenneman had documented in meticulous detail in notebooks found at the scene. According to Dr. Raymond Fletcher, a physician from West Plains, who was brought in to examine the children on May 13th, each child bore surgical incisions on their torsos and evidence of having been administered some unknown substance that left them in a semi-conscious, highly agitated state. The children were speaking in a manner similar to the adult patients, using words and phrases that seemed to be in various languages but were not fully coherent in any of them. More troubling still was the complete absence of Dr. Matthias Brenneman himself. Despite an extensive search of the house and surrounding property conducted throughout the night of May 10th and the following day, no trace of Brenneman was found. His wife Greta, once she had recovered sufficiently to provide a statement, claimed that Brenneman had told her earlier that evening that the work was nearly complete and that he needed to return to the source to finalize the transference. She stated that he had taken a lantern and departed the house around 10 o'clock in the evening, approximately 2 hours before the children's screaming had begun. Sheriff Talmadge organized a search party that focused particularly on Devil's Throat Cave, given Brenneman's previous association with the site. On May the 12th, 1886, a group of 6 men descended into the cave using ropes and lanterns. According to the official report filed by Sheriff Talmadge, the cave system was more extensive than anyone had realized, with the main shaft opening into a large chamber approximately 40 feet in height, with an underground stream running through it. Leading off from this chamber were multiple smaller passages, some of which descended deeper into the earth. In one of these lower passages, the search party found evidence that Brenneman had been working there for some time. According to Talmadge's report, the passage opened into a smaller chamber approximately 20 feet across. The walls bore extensive writings in what appeared to be the same symbols found in Brenneman's house. A makeshift table had been constructed from flat rocks, upon which were arranged several of Brenneman's medical instruments, numerous candles burnt down to stubs, and 3 of his books, their pages damaged by moisture. Most disturbing were the arrangements on the floor of the chamber, 7 circles drawn with some kind of white powder, arranged in a specific pattern around a central circle. Within each of the outer circles were items of clothing or personal effects. Later examination determined these belonged to the 7 patients Brenneman had treated since March. What the search party did not find was any trace of Dr. Matthias Brenneman himself. Despite searching every accessible passage in the cave system, Brenneman had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. One member of the search party, a man named Coleman Wade, noted in his personal account written many years later that the underground stream in the main chamber appeared to flow into an impossibly narrow crevice in the cave floor, and that when they dropped a weighted line into this opening, they could not find the bottom even with more than 100 feet of rope. Wade wrote, "I cannot say for certain, but I had the distinct impression that Brenneman had gone down into that crack in the earth, though how any man could fit through so narrow an opening I cannot explain. The sound of the water disappearing into it was like the sound of something being swallowed. The 3 Brenneman children were removed from the house and placed in the care of Reverend Hosea Blackwell, the Methodist circuit rider who served the Devil's Fork community." According to Reverend Blackwell's report to the Methodist Episcopal Church, filed in June 1886, the children's recovery was partial at best. Klaus, the eldest, never regained his full mental capacity. He could speak and perform basic tasks, but seemed to have lost all memory of events prior to May 10th, and he suffered from what Dr. Fletcher described as periodic episodes of profound disturbance during which he would speak in the manner previously described and attempt to leave the house, always in the direction of the cave system. Margaret and Wilhelm showed somewhat better recovery, but both children reported nightmares involving their father and underground spaces, and both exhibited an extreme fear of any kind of enclosed space. Greta Brenneman was questioned extensively by Sheriff Talmadge in the weeks following her husband's disappearance. According to the transcript of these interviews, preserved in the Douglas County records despite the courthouse fire later that year, Greta claimed that she had not fully understood what her husband was doing until it was too late to intervene. She stated that Matthias had become obsessed with certain texts he possessed, books dealing with what she called old European knowledge about the movement between worlds. She claimed that he believed the cave system beneath Devil's Fork was a place where the boundaries were thin, and that by performing certain procedures on living subjects, he could create a permanent opening between this world and another place that he believed would grant him knowledge and power beyond human understanding. Perhaps most inexplicable was Greta's claim that Matthias had told her the procedures he performed on his patients were not intended to harm them, but rather to prepare them to serve as anchors for the opening he was creating. According to her testimony, he said they would be the 7 pillars, that their suffering was necessary to hold open the door, and that once the door was fully opened, they would no longer suffer, but would instead become the guardians of the threshold. I did not understand what he meant. I thought it was merely the ramblings of a man who had spent too much time in study and isolation. I did not imagine he would turn his work upon his own children. The community of Devil's Fork never recovered from the events of 1886. According to census records and county documents, more than half of the families living in the hollow relocated to other areas within 2 years. The Brenneman house stood empty, as no one would purchase or occupy it. Martha Hensley's final diary entry regarding the affair, dated September 3, 1886, reads, "We are leaving Devil's Fork for my sister's place near Willow Springs. Jacob says we will not spend another winter in this hollow. No one speaks of Dr. Brenneman anymore, but we all think of him. Strange sounds have been heard from the direction of the cave, and 2 of our hogs were found dead near the trail that leads toward it, with no mark upon them but a strange smell like minerals or deep water. Whatever Brenneman did in that place, it was not completed when he vanished, and I fear it continues still." The official investigation into the Brenneman affair was complicated by the fire that destroyed the Douglas County Courthouse on April 30, 1886, just 10 days before the final crisis at the Brenneman house. Many county records were lost in that fire, though Sheriff Talmadge's reports and various personal documents preserved by individuals involved have allowed later researchers to reconstruct most of the essential facts. No charges were ever filed against Greta Brenneman, as authorities determined she had been a victim of her husband's madness rather than a willing participant in his actions. She and the 3 children relocated to St. Louis in late 1886, where they disappear from readily accessible records. What makes this case particularly disturbing to researchers is not merely the events of 1886 themselves, but the pattern of similar occurrences that has been documented in the Devil's Fork area, extending both before and after the Brenneman affair. In 1903, Professor Marcus Aldridge of the University of Missouri conducted an investigation into what he termed localized psychological phenomena in the Missouri Ozarks. Among the cases he examined was the Brenneman affair, and his findings, published in the Journal of American Folklore in 1904, revealed disturbing historical precedents. According to Professor Aldridge's research, local oral tradition among the older families in Douglas County contained references to similar incidents of healers who turned, going back to at least the 1840s. In particular, Aldridge documented accounts of a man known only as Der Höhlenmann, the caveman, who allegedly lived near the same Devil's Fork location in the early 1850s and who was said to have taken knowledge from beneath the earth before disappearing under circumstances similar to those surrounding Brenneman. More troubling still were Aldridge's interviews with elderly members of the Cherokee and Osage tribes who had lived in the region before forced relocation in the 1830s. According to these accounts, the particular cave system known as Devil's Throat was considered a forbidden place by native peoples, associated with stories of whispering spirits and warnings against descending too deeply into the earth in that specific location. Professor Aldridge's investigation included a personal descent into Devil's Throat Cave in October 1903. His account of this exploration, preserved in his field notes at the University of Missouri Archives, makes for disturbing reading. Aldridge noted that the cave system was indeed more extensive than the 1886 search party had been able to fully explore, with multiple passages leading deeper into the earth. In one of these deep passages, Aldridge discovered the chamber that had been described in Sheriff Talmadge's report, still bearing faint traces of the symbols Brenneman had inscribed on the walls nearly 2 decades earlier. According to Aldridge's notes, the symbols remain visible enough to copy, though the dampness of the cave has deteriorated them significantly. What is most unsettling is not the symbols themselves, which appear to be a mixture of alchemical signs, Germanic runes, and other characters I cannot identify, but rather the acoustic properties of this particular chamber. When one speaks in a normal voice, there is a peculiar echo that makes it sound as though the words are being repeated from deep beneath the floor of the cave, with a slight delay and a timbre that is distinctly different from a normal echo. My guide, a local man familiar with caves, became extremely agitated and insisted we leave immediately. He claimed the echo was not merely a natural phenomenon, but evidence of something beneath us that was learning to speak our words. More troubling still was what Aldridge discovered regarding the narrow crevice in the main chamber floor, into which the underground stream disappeared. Aldridge brought surveying equipment and attempted to create a map of the cave system's extent. According to his calculations, the crevice appeared to descend at least 300 feet below the main chamber, far deeper than any known cave system in that area should extend given the local geology. Aldridge noted, "The standard limestone strata in this region should not permit a vertical shaft of such depth. Either my measurements are in error, which I do not believe to be the case, or there is something unusual about the geological structure at this specific location." The sound of the water falling into the crevice continues for an impossibly long time before fading, suggesting a drop of significant depth. Professor Aldridge's investigation extended beyond the cave itself to the families who had been affected by Brenneman's actions. He was able to locate and interview several individuals who had been children in Devil's Fork in 1886, including one of the Pritchett family daughters, Naomi Pritchett Weber, who was 70 years old at the time of Aldridge's visit in 1903. According to the transcript of this interview, Mrs. Weber provided details about her brother Thomas's deterioration that had not been included in the official reports. She stated, "Thomas was my older brother, and I loved him dearly. After he began seeing Dr. Brenneman, he changed in ways that frightened me. He would sit in our cabin and stare at the walls, but he was not seeing the walls. He said he could see tunnels extending in all directions, tunnels that went down into the earth deeper than any mine. He said Dr. Brenneman had opened his eyes to see these tunnels, and that there were things moving through them, coming closer to the surface. He drew pictures of these things, though the drawings made no sense. They were all angles and curves that hurt to look at. When he died, I was relieved, though I know that is a sin to say. I was relieved because I thought whatever he was seeing would die with him. But I still dream about those tunnels sometimes, and I wonder if he really was seeing something that exists, or if Dr. Brenneman had simply driven him mad." Perhaps most inexplicable was Aldrich's discovery of what happened to Klaus Brenneman, the eldest son who had never fully recovered from the events of May 1886. Through church records in St. Louis, Aldrich learned that Klaus had been institutionalized at the Missouri State Lunatic Asylum in Fulton in 1892, after what was described as a progressive mental deterioration accompanied by episodes of violence and incoherent speech. Aldrich traveled to Fulton and was able to examine Klaus's medical records and speak briefly with him, though Klaus was by that time nearly nonverbal and heavily sedated. According to Aldrich's notes from this visit, Klaus Brenneman, now aged 32, presents as a man much older, his hair entirely white, his physical health poor, despite his relatively young age. He recognized my purpose in visiting him almost immediately, though I had not stated it. When I mentioned his father's name, Klaus became agitated and began speaking in the same mixture of languages that had been described in the 1886 reports. I was able to make out certain repeated phrases in German that roughly translated to, "The 7 are still anchored," and "The door remains ajar." Most disturbing was Klaus's insistence, during a brief moment of lucidity, that his father had not disappeared, but had rather completed his passage through, and now existed in a state that Klaus described as being adjacent to here in the spaces between layers. When I asked what this meant, Klaus said, "He is in the earth, but not in the earth. He is in the stone, in the water, in the darkness beneath, and he is still working. The door he opened has not closed. The 7 anchors still hold it open, though most of them are dead now. Their dying didn't release them. He made sure of that." The pattern of strange occurrences in the Devil's Fork area continued well into the 20th century. In 1921, Dr. Helena Vance, a psychologist from Chicago who was conducting research on what she termed localized mass hysteria, visited Douglas County to investigate the Brenneman case and other similar incidents in the region. Her monograph, Psychological Phenomena in Isolated Communities, a study of the Missouri Ozarks, published in 1923, documented a series of unsettling incidents that had occurred near Devil's Fork in the decades following Brenneman's disappearance. According to Dr. Vance's research, between 1886 and 1920, at least 12 individuals had disappeared in the Devil's Fork area under circumstances that investigating authorities could not adequately explain. Most disturbing was the pattern these disappearances followed. According to Dr. Vance's analysis, in each case, the missing individual had, in the days or weeks prior to their disappearance, expressed unusual interest in the cave systems in the area, particularly Devil's Throat. Several were heard to speak about hearing voices or feeling a compulsion to explore the caves. In at least 5 cases, witnesses reported seeing the missing person entering or near Devil's Throat Cave shortly before they vanished. Extensive searches were conducted in each instance, but no trace of the missing individuals was ever found, despite the relatively limited extent of the cave system as it was then understood. More troubling still was Dr. Vance's discovery that several of these missing individuals had been descendants of the 7 patients Brenneman had treated in early 1886. According to her research, 2 of the disappeared were children of Sarah Combs, the woman who had died in late April 1886 after attempting to dig into the Devil's Throat cave floor. 3 others were nieces and nephews of Brenneman's patients. Dr. Vance noted, "The pattern suggests either a familial predisposition to whatever psychological disturbance affected the 1886 patients, or, if one entertains more unorthodox theories, some form of connection or claim that extends through bloodlines." Local folklore has developed around the idea that Brenneman's curse, as it is known in the area, passes through families, though there is no scientific basis for such a claim. Dr. Vance herself descended into Devil's Throat Cave as part of her investigation in June 1921. Her account of this exploration provides additional disturbing details. According to her field notes, the cave presents as a typical limestone formation, though unusually deep for this region. The main chamber is impressive in scale. However, the chamber where Brenneman conducted his work, located approximately 200 feet from the main entrance through a series of narrow passages, possesses qualities that are difficult to explain through conventional geology or acoustics. My assistant, Mr. Theodore Wells, and I both noted that sounds behave strangely in this space. Spoken words seem to linger longer than they should, and there is a quality to the echoes that suggest they are coming from a much larger space than the chamber actually occupies. More unsettling was the experience both of us reported of feeling as though we were being observed from below, from the direction of the crevice into which the underground stream flows. Mr. Wells became increasingly agitated and insisted we leave after only 15 minutes in the chamber. I cannot state definitively that there is anything objectively unusual about the space, but I can confirm that it produces a subjective experience of profound unease that I have not encountered in other underground locations. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the testimony Dr. Vance was able to obtain from Margaretta Brenneman, who was the only one of Dr. Brenneman's children who agreed to speak with her. Margarette, who was 47 years old in 1921 and living in Kansas City under a married name, provided an account that suggested she had retained more memory of the events of May 1886 than the official records had indicated. According to Dr. Vance's interview transcript, Margarette stated, "I remember more than I wish I did. My father was not mad, at least not in the way people think of madness. He believed absolutely in what he was doing. He had found something in his books, some procedure or ritual that he was convinced would open a door to a place of great knowledge and power. He said the cave was important because it was a natural threshold, a place where the boundaries between here and there were already weak. The patients he treated were not experiments. They were components of the mechanism he was building. He called them anchors because they were supposed to hold the door open permanently once he completed the work. When Dr. Vance asked Margaret what her father had done to the 3 children on the night of May 10, 1886, Margaret's response was deeply unsettling. He was trying to make us into keys. He said the door could be opened with anchors made from patients who came to him seeking healing, but to make the door remain open permanently, he needed keys forged from his own blood. He had been preparing us for months, giving us small doses of whatever substance he had brought up from the cave, teaching us phrases in languages I didn't recognize, making us memorize symbols and patterns. That final night, he was completing the work on us. He made incisions in specific places on our bodies, and he gave us a much larger dose of the substance. I remember feeling as though I was falling, even though I was lying on a table. I remember seeing things that couldn't exist, spaces folded inside other spaces, and something moving through those spaces toward us. Then I heard Klaus screaming, and I started screaming too. The next thing I remember clearly, the men from the settlement were in the house, and my father was gone. According to Margaret, her father had told her mother that if he successfully completed the work, he would be able to move freely between this world and the other place he had accessed. Margaret stated, "He said he would not die, but would instead pass through, and once on the other side, he would be able to continue his studies with knowledge and tools that no one in this world had ever possessed. He promised my mother that we would all join him eventually, that we would become something greater than human. I don't know if he succeeded or if he simply fell to his death in that cave shaft. But I have spent my entire adult life trying to convince myself that he failed because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The modern history of Devil's Fork and Devil's Throat Cave includes several additional incidents that researchers have struggled to explain through conventional means. In 1937, a geological survey team from the University of Missouri spent 3 days examining the cave system as part of a broader study of Missouri's underground water resources. According to the survey report, filed with the Missouri Geological Survey, the team encountered several anomalies in the Devil's Throat system that did not align with standard limestone cave formations. Most notably, their soundings of the crevice in the main chamber floor suggested a depth of more than 400 feet, which should not have been possible given the local geology. More troubling still was an incident described in the survey report involving one of the team members, a graduate student named Robert Kellerman. According to the report, on the second day of our survey, Mr. Kellerman descended into the chamber, where previous reports indicated Dr. Brenneman had conducted his work in 1886. He was equipped with standard surveying tools and a safety line. After approximately 20 minutes in the chamber, Mr. Kellerman's line gave a series of sharp tugs indicating distress. The team hauled him up rapidly. Upon reaching the surface, Mr. Kellerman was in a state of significant agitation. He reported having heard voices speaking to him from the crevice in the cave floor, voices that spoke his name and used phrases from his childhood that no one present could have known. Mr. Kellerman refused to descend further into the cave, and upon returning to Columbia, requested transfer to a different research project. He declined to provide any further details about his experience. The Devil's Fork area was largely abandoned by the 1940s, with the remaining families relocating to more accessible areas where modern roads and services were available. The Brenneman House collapsed at some point in the 1950s, and the site is now marked only by a depression where the foundation once stood. Devil's Throat Cave remains accessible, though it is located on private property and is not regularly visited. According to current land records, the area encompassing the cave changed hands several times between 1920 and 1960, with none of the owners maintaining possession for more than a few years. In 1968, a spelunking group from Springfield obtained permission to explore Devil's Throat as part of a broader effort to map cave systems in southern Missouri. Their experience, documented in the Missouri Speleological Survey archives, adds another layer to the mystery. According to the group's report, they successfully descended to the main chamber and located the smaller passages leading to the chamber where Brenneman had worked. However, they found that the passage to this chamber had partially collapsed at some point in the intervening decades, making access difficult and potentially dangerous. Two members of the group, James Worthy and Patricia Chin, did manage to squeeze through the obstruction to reach the Brenneman chamber. According to their report, the chamber is approximately 20 feet in diameter and perhaps 12 feet in height. The walls still bear faint traces of inscriptions, though they are badly deteriorated. Most notable is the acoustic property of the space. Sound behaves in a manner inconsistent with the chamber's size and shape. Words seem to echo from directions where there are no reflecting surfaces, and there is a low-frequency resonance that becomes noticeable after a few minutes in the chamber. Ms. Chin, who has extensive cave exploration experience, noted that she felt increasingly uncomfortable in the space and recommended we leave after only 10 minutes. Both of us reported experiencing a sensation of being watched or observed from the direction of the floor, though the floor is solid limestone with no openings visible. More troubling still was what Worthy and Chin discovered in the chamber. According to their report, near the center of the floor space, we found evidence that someone had been in this chamber relatively recently, certainly within the last decade, and possibly more recently than that. There were the remnants of candles, burnt down to stubs, and scratched into the limestone floor were fresh markings that appeared similar in character to the deteriorated inscriptions on the walls. Most disturbing were 7 small objects arranged in a circle around a central point. They appeared to be bundles of cloth or leather, each approximately 6 inches long, bound with what looked like wire. We did not disturb these objects, but photographed them for documentation. Ms. Chen noted that the objects had an unpleasant smell, organic and faintly rotten. We both agreed that the objects appeared to have been placed with deliberate intent, as part of some kind of ritual or ceremony. Upon exiting the cave, we reported these findings to the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, but no follow-up investigation was conducted to our knowledge. To this day, researchers debate what actually occurred in Devil's Fork in 1886 and what explains the pattern of disturbing incidents that have been associated with that location both before and after the Brenneman affair. Dr. Elizabeth Moreland, a historian at Missouri State University who published a comprehensive study of the case in 2003, has argued that the Brenneman incident can be explained as a case of severe mental illness compounded by isolation, frontier medicine practices, and mass hysteria. According to Dr. Moreland's analysis, Brenneman was likely suffering from paranoid delusions that led him to harm his patients and children, and his disappearance was most probably a suicide accomplished by jumping into the deep crevice in Devil's Throat Cave. The subsequent reports of strange experiences in the cave, according to Dr. Moreland, can be attributed to the power of suggestion and the human tendency to interpret ambiguous sensory experiences as confirming pre-existing beliefs about a location's history. However, other researchers have noted aspects of the case that are more difficult to explain through conventional psychological or social frameworks. Professor David Nkomo, an anthropologist who studied the case as part of a broader examination of folk medical practices in isolated communities, published a paper in 2007 arguing that the Brenneman case may represent an instance of what he terms localized reality distortion, in which specific geographic locations, for reasons not fully understood, produce effects on human consciousness and physical systems that deviate from normal patterns. Professor Nkomo notes that the Devil's Fork area, and specifically Devil's Throat Cave, has been associated with anomalous experiences by multiple groups of witnesses over a period exceeding 150 years, involving individuals with no connection to each other and no prior knowledge of the location's history. According to Professor Nkomo, while I do not propose any supernatural explanation, the consistency of the reported phenomena suggests that there may be environmental factors at this specific location, perhaps related to unusual geological formations, electromagnetic properties, or acoustic characteristics that produce measurable effects on individuals who spend time in the area, particularly in the cave system. Further scientific investigation using modern sensing equipment would be valuable. The current status of Devil's Throat Cave and the surrounding Devil's Fork area remains ambiguous. The land is privately owned and access is restricted, though local residents report that hikers and curiosity seekers occasionally venture to the cave entrance. The most recent documented incident at the site occurred in 2015 when 2 college students from Springfield were reported missing after telling friends they were going to explore Devil's Throat Cave. A search and rescue operation was conducted over a 3-day period in October 2015. The students were eventually found approximately 10 miles from the cave, disoriented and suffering from dehydration and exposure. According to the Douglas County Sheriff's report from this incident, both students claimed to have descended into the cave and become lost in passages they had not expected to find. They stated that their flashlights had failed simultaneously, forcing them to navigate in darkness, and that they had eventually found their way to an exit that brought them to the surface in an area neither of them recognized. However, cavers familiar with Devil's Throat have noted that the cave system has only one entrance and that there are no passages extending in the direction where the students merged. The students themselves provided contradictory accounts of their experience, with one claiming they had been in the cave for perhaps 6 hours, while the other insisted they had been underground for at least 2 days, though the actual elapsed time from when they were reported missing to when they were found was 3 days. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the continuing mystery of Devil's Fork is the testimony of elderly residents in Douglas County who remember stories passed down through their families about Dr. Matthias Brenneman and the events of 1886. Several of these individuals, interviewed by researchers over the years, have reported that their grandparents or great-grandparents who lived in the area during the Brenneman era claimed that strange sounds could sometimes be heard coming from the direction of Devil's Throat Cave on certain nights, sounds described as voices chanting in unison in a language no one could identify. According to these accounts, local residents believed that Brenneman had not disappeared, but had rather succeeded in whatever work he had been attempting, and that the effects of this work continued to manifest in ways that were subtle but persistent. Mary Catherine Boone, aged 89 at the time of an interview conducted in 2010, stated, "My great-grandmother was Martha Hensley, who kept the diary about Dr. Brenneman. She lived until 1921, and I knew her when I was a child. She told me that the people in Devil's Fork never truly believed that Brenneman had died in that cave. She said there was evidence that someone kept going back to the cave year after year to maintain whatever Brenneman had started. She said that on certain dates, particularly around May 10th, the anniversary of when Brenneman vanished, lights could sometimes be seen near the cave entrance late at night, as though someone was down there with lanterns. But nobody ever saw who it was, and nobody wanted to go investigate. Great-grandmother said that some things in this world should be left alone, that there are places where the earth itself has been wounded or opened in ways that can't be healed or closed, and Devil's Fork is one of those places. The case of Dr. Matthias Brenneman and the Devil's Fork community remains one of the most thoroughly documented yet profoundly mysterious incidents in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. What began as a story of a frontier physician whose treatments turned horrifyingly wrong has evolved into a more complex narrative involving questions about the nature of human consciousness, the effects of isolation and belief on perception, and the possibility that certain locations may possess properties that we do not yet fully understand. Whether Brenneman was simply a mentally disturbed individual who harmed his patients and children before taking his own life, or whether he genuinely discovered something in the depths of Devil's Throat Cave that allowed him to accomplish the impossible transformation he claimed to seek, remains a question that researchers continue to debate more than 135 years after the events occurred. The physical evidence that remains is fragmentary. The Brenneman property has returned to forest, with only traces of the foundation still visible to those who know where to look. Devil's Throat Cave continues to exist as it has for millions of years. Its limestone passages, carved by water and time, its deepest reaches unexplored and perhaps unexplorable. The descendants of those affected by Brenneman's actions have long since scattered, though some still carry the stories passed down through their families, stories of a German doctor who promised healing but delivered curse, who claimed to have found a door in the earth and may have succeeded in opening it. The 7 patients who served as Brenneman's anchors are long dead, their graves scattered across Douglas County and beyond. Yet, according to some researchers, their role in whatever Brenneman created or attempted to create may not have ended with their deaths, if his own writings and the testimony of his children can be believed. The notion that the suffering and transformation of these 7 individuals served to create some kind of permanent opening or connection to another place or state of being is, by any rational standard, absurd. Yet the pattern of strange experiences associated with Devil's Throat Cave, extending across multiple generations and involving numerous witnesses with no connection to each other, suggests that something about this particular location continues to affect those who venture there. Current residents of Douglas County generally prefer not to discuss the Brenneman case, and the Devil's Fork area itself has acquired a reputation that ensures it remains relatively isolated and unvisited. Local folklore has woven the incident into a broader tapestry of Ozark ghost stories and legends, though those most familiar with the documented facts understand that the Brenneman case rests on a foundation of verifiable events and recorded testimony that distinguishes it from mere folklore. The existence of Sheriff Talmadge's reports, the diary of Martha Hensley, the medical records of the affected children, the testimony of Greta Brenneman, and the numerous academic investigations conducted over the decades provide an unusually well-documented record of events that nonetheless resist simple explanation. The ultimate fate of Dr. Matthias Brenneman remains unknown. The most probable explanation is that he descended into the crevice in Devil's Throat Cave, whether intentionally or accidentally, and perished in the deep underground water system that flows through the lower reaches of the limestone strata. His body, if this is what occurred, would have been carried away by underground streams and would never be recovered. This explanation accounts for the facts in a manner consistent with known geology and human behavior. Yet there remain aspects of the case that this explanation does not address. The evidence that someone continued to visit and maintain whatever Brenneman had established in the cave chamber, documented by multiple witnesses over multiple decades, cannot easily be dismissed. The testimony of individuals who descended into the cave and experienced phenomena they could not rationally explain forms a pattern that spans from the 1880s through the early 21st century. The fact that the cave system itself appears to possess acoustic and possibly geological properties that differ from standard limestone formations in the region adds another layer of mystery. In 2016, Dr. Sarah Chen, a geophysicist from the University of Arkansas, specializing in karst terrain analysis, obtained permission to conduct a detailed survey of Devil's Throat Cave using modern ground-penetrating radar and sonar equipment. Her findings, published in the Journal of Cave and Karst Studies in 2018, revealed several anomalies that she acknowledged were difficult to explain using standard geological models. According to Dr. Chen's report, the limestone strata in the immediate vicinity of Devil's Throat Cave show unusual fracture patterns that do not align with the typical dissolution processes that create most Ozark cave systems. More significantly, her sonar readings of the deep crevice in the main chamber suggested that it descends at least 500 feet, possibly deeper, and appears to connect to a much larger void space at significant depth. Dr. Chen noted in her report, the depth and configuration of the lower void space, if my readings are accurate, should not exist in this geological context. The Ordovician dolomite formations that characterize this region of the Ozarks typically do not support vertical shaft development of this magnitude, and the presence of what appears to be a large chamber at a depth of approximately 500 to 600 feet is inconsistent with known cave systems in Douglas County. It is possible that my equipment was producing erroneous readings due to unusual mineral content in the rock or other factors I have not identified. However, if the readings are accurate, then Devil's Throat Cave represents a geological formation that deviates significantly from expected patterns and would warrant much more extensive investigation. Dr. Chen did not descend into the Brenneman chamber during her survey, as the partial collapse of the access passage made this inadvisable without specialized equipment and additional personnel. However, she did spend approximately 30 minutes in the main chamber of Devil's Throat, and her field notes include observations that echo those of earlier investigators. She wrote, "The acoustic properties of this cave are unusual. There is a resonance frequency that becomes noticeable after a few minutes, a very low-frequency sound that is felt more than heard. My recording equipment captured this sound, and analysis suggests it may be produced by water movement in deep passages, though the characteristics of the sound are not typical of underground streams I have recorded in other cave systems. Additionally, I experienced a psychological response to the space that was disproportionate to any objective danger. This may have been influenced by my knowledge of the location's history, but I found myself feeling increasingly anxious and disturbed the longer I remained in the chamber, particularly when working near the crevice. I have explored dozens of caves in my career and have never experienced such a strong negative reaction to a space. The psychological and physiological effects reported by individuals who spend time in Devil's Throat Cave represent one of the most consistent elements of the mystery. Across more than a century of documented accounts, visitors to the cave, particularly to the main chamber and the Brenneman work chamber, have reported similar experiences, feelings of being observed or followed, auditory phenomena including voices or whispers, unusual acoustic effects, unexplained equipment failures, distortions in time perception, and profound psychological distress that persists even after leaving the cave. While these reports could be dismissed as the power of suggestion or the natural human response to an enclosed underground space with an unsettling history, the consistency of the accounts and their occurrence among individuals with no prior knowledge of the location's history suggests there may be environmental factors at work that have not been adequately studied. In 2019, a team of researchers from Washington University in St. Louis conducted a preliminary investigation into potential environmental factors at Devil's Throat that might explain some of the reported phenomena. The team, led by Dr. Michael Torres, a neurologist specializing in environmental effects on brain function, spent 3 days in the Devil's Fork area conducting measurements of electromagnetic fields, air quality, radon levels, acoustic properties, and other factors that might affect human physiology or perception. According to their preliminary report, filed with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, they identified several anomalies. Most notably, the research team detected unusually high levels of a specific low-frequency acoustic resonance emanating from deep within the cave system, particularly from the direction of the crevice in the main chamber. Dr. Torres noted, low-frequency sound, particularly in the range of 15 to 20 hertz, can have significant effects on human perception and physiology. It can induce feelings of anxiety, fear, and unease, and in some cases can produce visual hallucinations or the sensation of a presence nearby. The sound is typically below the threshold of conscious hearing, but is perceived subconsciously. We detected sustained low-frequency acoustic energy at approximately 17 hertz, emanating from the deepest accessible portions of Devil's Throat Cave. The source of this sound is unclear, though it may be related to water movement or air currents in deep passages. However, the consistency and intensity of the sound is unusual compared to other cave systems we have studied. Additionally, the research team detected elevated levels of radon gas in certain portions of the cave, particularly in the narrower passages leading to the Brenneman Chamber. While not at levels that would pose an immediate health risk during brief exposure, Dr. Torres noted that radon exposure can produce neurological effects including headache, dizziness, and alterations in perception, and that individuals who spent extended periods in the cave, as Brenneman certainly did, would have been exposed to significant cumulative doses. The team also detected unusual electromagnetic field variations near the crevice, though they were unable to determine the source of these variations. Dr. Torres concluded, "While our preliminary investigation has identified several environmental factors that could contribute to the psychological and physiological effects reported by visitors to Devil's Throat Cave, I must emphasize that these findings explain only some aspects of the reported phenomena. The low-frequency acoustic energy, radon exposure, and electromagnetic anomalies could account for feelings of unease, perceptual distortions, and some of the auditory experiences reported. However, these factors do not explain the more complex reported phenomena, including the apparent time distortions experienced by the 2015 missing hikers, the equipment failures reported by multiple investigation teams, or the historical pattern of individuals becoming obsessively drawn to the cave following initial visits. Much more extensive investigation would be required to develop a comprehensive understanding of this location. The Washington University team's investigation was cut short when one of the researchers, graduate student Jennifer Morrow, experienced a severe panic attack while working in the main chamber of the cave and had to be evacuated. According to the incident report, Morrow had been taking measurements near the crevice when she suddenly reported feeling as though she was falling, despite standing on solid rock. She became convinced that she could hear voices calling to her from below and attempted to approach the crevice despite safety protocols prohibiting this. Other team members had to physically restrain her and escort her from the cave. She was evaluated at a hospital in West Plains and released with a diagnosis of acute anxiety attack. However, in a follow-up interview conducted 3 weeks later, Morrow stated that she continued to have nightmares about the cave and had decided to withdraw from the research project. She declined to provide details about what she experienced, but stated, "There is something wrong with that place. I know how that sounds, but I am a scientist, and I am telling you that there is something objectively wrong with Devil's Throat Cave that goes beyond environmental factors. I felt as though something in that cave recognized me, knew my name, wanted something from me. I cannot explain it more clearly than that." The most recent documented incident at Devil's Fork occurred in October 2022, though details remain limited as the case is still under investigation by Douglas County authorities. According to local news reports, A man in his early 30s who had been camping in the area was found by hikers near the entrance to Devil's Throat Cave in a state of significant distress. He was transported to a hospital in Springfield, where he was treated for dehydration and exposure. According to the brief report filed by the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, the individual claimed to have descended into the cave 3 days earlier and to have discovered evidence that someone is still conducting rituals or ceremonies in the deep chamber, though he was unable or unwilling to provide specific details. Deputies who investigated the cave entrance noted that the access appeared more open than in recent years, suggesting that someone had been working to clear the partial collapse that had blocked the passage to the Brenneman chamber. However, the deputies did not descend into the cave to verify this observation. The individual who was found at the cave has since relocated out of state and has not responded to requests for interviews from researchers or journalists. For those who study the Brenneman case and the broader mystery of Devil's Fork, the question of what actually occurred in 1886 and what may continue to occur at that location remains unresolved. The mainstream academic interpretation maintains that the case can be understood as a tragic instance of mental illness, compounded by frontier medical practice, isolation, and the creation of folklore around a disturbing historical event. According to this interpretation, Matthias Brenneman was a disturbed individual, possibly suffering from schizophrenia or another serious mental illness, who developed delusional beliefs about caves, otherworldly knowledge, and the transformation of human consciousness. His medical knowledge allowed him to harm his patients and children in ways that seemed purposeful and ritualistic, but there was no actual purpose beyond the expression of his delusions. His disappearance was a suicide accomplished by jumping or climbing into the deep crevice in Devil's Throat Cave. The subsequent strange experiences reported by visitors to the cave can be attributed to environmental factors like the low-frequency acoustic energy identified by Dr. Torres, combined with the psychological power of knowing the location's disturbing history. This interpretation has the virtue of requiring no assumptions beyond documented psychological and environmental factors. However, critics of this interpretation point out that it does not adequately account for certain aspects of the case. The consistency of phenomena reported across multiple decades by witnesses with no knowledge of each other or of the location's history suggests something more than mere psychology and folklore. The testimony of Margaret Brenneman, given decades after the events and corroborated in certain details by other sources, indicates that Matthias Brenneman was working from specific texts and following a purposeful methodology, rather than simply acting out random delusions. The geological anomalies identified by Dr. Chen and the environmental factors detected by Dr. Torres suggest that Devil's Throat Cave possesses unusual physical properties that may have drawn Brenneman to that specific location and may continue to affect those who visit it. An alternative interpretation suggests that while there is no evidence for supernatural phenomena in any conventional sense, there may be naturally occurring but poorly understood physical processes at certain locations that can affect human consciousness, perception, and possibly even physical health in ways that appear anomalous until properly studied. According to this view, locations like Devil's Throat Cave, which possess unusual geological formations, acoustic properties, electromagnetic characteristics, and possibly other factors not yet identified, may create environments where human neurological and psychological functioning is significantly altered. If Matthias Brenneman spent extensive time in such an environment, particularly in the deep Brenneman chamber where multiple factors appear to converge, he may have experienced profound alterations in his consciousness that shaped his beliefs and actions. Moreover, this interpretation suggests if Brenneman administered substances derived from cave minerals or organisms to his patients, and if those substances interacted with whatever neurological effects the cave environment itself produces, the result could have been the severe and consistent psychological and physical deterioration documented in the historical records. The patients, having been exposed to both the substances and the cave environment, may have developed a form of obsessive attraction to the location, which would explain why several of them attempted to return to the cave before their deaths. The children, subjected to whatever procedures Brenneman performed on May 10, 1886, may have been permanently affected by a combination of psychological trauma and physical exposure to whatever agents Brenneman was using. This interpretation has the advantage of potentially explaining the documented facts without requiring supernatural assumptions, while still acknowledging that something genuinely unusual and not yet understood may be occurring at this location. However, it remains speculative, as the precise mechanisms by which cave environments, geological factors, and unknown substances might combine to produce the effects documented in the Brenneman case have not been demonstrated through controlled research. The most unsettling aspect of the Devil's Fork mystery may be the evidence, fragmentary but persistent, that suggests someone has continued to visit Devil's Throat Cave over the decades, maintaining or attempting to maintain whatever Brenneman established there. The objects discovered by the spelunking team in 1968, the fresh markings observed at various times, the reports of lights seen near the cave entrance on specific dates, and most recently, the 2022 report of the passage to the Brenneman chamber being cleared of obstruction, all suggest that Brenneman's work, whatever it actually was, has not been forgotten by everyone. Whether this represents the actions of individuals obsessed with the historical incident and attempting to reconstruct or continue Brenneman's activities, or whether it indicates something more disturbing, remains unknown. Local residents of Douglas County, particularly those in the areas closest to the former Devil's Fork settlement, generally maintain a policy of not discussing the Brenneman case with outsiders and discouraging curiosity about Devil's Throat Cave. The current owner of the property on which the cave is located, who has requested anonymity, has posted signs prohibiting trespassing and has stated to local authorities that he will prosecute anyone found on the property without permission. According to individuals familiar with the property owner, he purchased the land in 2018 without knowledge of its history, and became aware of the Devil's Throat Cave only after strange experiences led him to research the location. He has stated to neighbors that he will not enter the cave himself and wishes he had never purchased the property, but he has not chosen to sell it, possibly because the location's history would make it difficult to find a buyer. The legacy of Dr. Matthias Brenneman extends beyond the specific location of Devil's Fork and Devil's Throat Cave. The case has become part of the broader folklore of the Missouri Ozarks, a region already rich with stories of isolated homesteads, frontier hardships, and events that resist easy explanation. For researchers interested in the intersections of history, psychology, geology, and the limits of human understanding, the Brenneman case offers a wealth of documented material and a mystery that remains genuinely unsolved despite more than 135 years of investigation and analysis. The 7 patients who served as Brenneman's anchors died painful deaths that their families and communities could not adequately explain or prevent. Whether they died as victims of a madman's delusions, as casualties of frontier medical practice gone horrifically wrong, or as unwilling participants in some process that Brenneman genuinely discovered or created in the depths of Devil's Throat Cave, they suffered greatly, and their suffering was documented by witnesses who were themselves traumatized by what they observed. The Brenneman children survived but carried the physical and psychological scars of their ordeal for the remainder of their lives. Greta Brenneman, who may have been both victim and accomplice, died in obscurity in St. Louis in 1912, having spent the last decades of her life in poverty and isolation. The community of Devil's Fork itself never recovered, its families scattered, its homesteads abandoned, the land returned to forest. Where 15 families once struggled to build lives in an isolated Ozark hollow, now there is only wilderness, occasional hunters and hikers, and a limestone cave whose depths have never been fully explored and may never be fully understood. The question of what happened to Dr. Matthias Brenneman on the night of May 10, 1886, remains the central mystery of this case. Did he die in Devil's Throat Cave, his body swept away by underground waters or lost in unmapped passages? Did he somehow escape the area and begin a new life elsewhere under a different identity, a possibility that seems remote but cannot be entirely dismissed? Or did he achieve something that the documented evidence only hints at, a transformation or passage that his own writings and the testimony of those who knew him best suggested he was attempting? The rational mind rejects this last possibility as inconsistent with known physical laws and human capabilities. Yet the irrational mind, confronted with the accumulated testimony of witnesses, the unusual properties of the location, and the pattern of ongoing strangeness that has persisted for more than a century, finds it difficult to dismiss entirely. For those who visit the Missouri Ozarks today, Douglas County offers scenic beauty, outdoor recreation, and a taste of rural American life far from urban centers. The county seat of Ava is a small town where life proceeds at a pace that seems drawn from an earlier era. Bryant Creek flows through the county much as it did in 1886, its waters clear and cold, its banks lined with sycamore and willow. In most respects, the county has put its troubled frontier history behind it and embraced its identity as a quiet corner of the Ozarks, where families can live close to the land and traditional values persist. But in the southeastern portion of the county, in a hollow that has not been given an official name on modern maps, there is a limestone cave that descends into darkness. Those who know its location generally choose not to speak of it. Those who have descended into its depths often wish they had not. And on certain nights, according to those few who still live near enough to observe, lights can sometimes be seen in that direction, moving through the forest toward the cave entrance, as though someone is keeping an appointment that was made long ago and has never been canceled. The case of Dr. Matthias Brenneman, the witch doctor of Devil's Fork, who healed and then cursed, remains one of the most meticulously documented and least satisfactorily explained incidents in the history of frontier medicine and Ozark settlement. Whether it represents a tragedy of mental illness and primitive medical practice, an example of environmental factors affecting human consciousness in ways we do not yet understand, or something more disturbing still, it stands as a reminder that not all questions have answers, not all doors should be opened, and not all places should be explored, regardless of what knowledge or power might await those brave or foolish enough to descend into the darkness beneath the earth.